The salt spray hits your face as you stumble across the blackened sand. The air still reeks of smoke and iron. Behind you, the world you knew is gone. A village reduced to ash, the screams fading into the crackle of dying fires. Ahead, strange men laugh in a language you don't understand, their shadows flickering in the torchlight. They wear no horns, no shining armor, only furs, leather, and the calm assurance of men who've done this 100 times before. You are 17, barefoot, wrists bound. Around you, others shuffle in silence, mothers clutching their children, old men too weak to resist. The night feels endless, the sea stretching like a black mirror to nowhere. As you're forced toward the longship, waiting on the shore, you realize something horrifying. This is not chaos. It's order. Every movement, every command, every terrified life is part of a system. Movies show the Vikings as wild, roaring warriors. But this is something colder, a business transaction carved into the heart of history. For centuries, the Viking world thrived not only on conquest and exploration, but on an industry few dare to imagine, a human trade that stretched from Ireland, coast to the rivers of modern-day Russia. Behind every raid was an intention, a calculation, a promise of profit. The ships weren't built just for glory or discovery. They were built to carry people, unwilling and unnumbered, across the sea. The longship itself was the perfect tool of terror. Its shallow hull could glide silently up rivers, far beyond any coastal defense. Villages that believed they were safe, hidden deep inland, would wake to find strangers at their doors. These raids weren't random. They were targeted. A monastery might seem like a place of peace, but to Viking raiders, it was a vault filled with gold, manuscripts, and people valuable enough to sell. In the Irish annals of Ulster, the record is brutally simple. The foreigners carried off a great host of women into captivity. That phrase, a great host, repeats again and again across centuries. It wasn't an accident, it was a pattern. The moment you were taken, your name, your story, ceased to exist. In Old Norse, you became a thrall, a word that didn't mean servant or maid, but property, the same term used for cattle or farm tools. In the eyes of Viking law, a thrall wasn't a person. She could not testify in court. She could not marry. She could not inherit or own. If her master chose to punish her, no one could intervene. And yet, these women were the hidden foundation of the Viking world. Their labor built its economy, wove its sails, and kept its fires burning, while legends speak of heroes like Ragnar and Eric the Red. The truth is that the Viking Age ran on the backs of the unseen, the thousands of captives who made everything possible. Imagine the voyage across the North Atlantic, weeks at sea, open decks, freezing winds, no shelter from rain or salt, dozens of captives crammed between oars, chained to benches slick with seawater. Some would never make it ashore again. Those who did were delivered to places that pulsed with an energy unlike anything they'd known. The Viking markets, Dublin, known to the Norse as Dyflin, became one of the largest centers of this trade. Archaeologists have uncovered its dark foundations, layers of wooden walkways, animal bones, coins from across Europe, and human remains buried without care. Dublin wasn't just a settlement, it was a clearinghouse for lives. From here, captives were shipped to Iceland, Norway, and the far eastern markets of Russia and the Islamic world. An Arab diplomat who met the Vikings along the Volga River, wrote of their strange customs, their strength, their ships, and their cruelty. He described markets where human beings were treated as goods. Transactions were done in silver, measured by weight. The Vikings traded furs, amber, and iron. But their most valuable export was people. This wasn't some rare cruelty. It was an industry. The silver coins unearthed in Scandinavia, tens of thousands of them, prove it. Most came not from Europe, but from the Caliphate, far to the south. The Vikings didn't mine silver. They earned it in trade, and what they traded most often was flesh. The longships became arteries of an empire built not on kingdoms, but on captives. Every sail that caught the wind had been woven by unseen hands. Every hall, filled with feasting warriors, was warmed by the work of those who had no freedom to leave it. And yet, the world remembers them as explorers, poets, and heroes. For the women taken on those shores, history was not adventure, it was erasure. The sagas they wrote never mentioned them by name. Their voices were silenced, their stories buried beneath the glory of the men who conquered them. But traces remain. Genetic studies of Iceland tell the truth in the cold language of science. Nearly two-thirds of the female ancestry of early Icelanders came from the British Isles. Most of the men were Norse. The conclusion is chilling. The founding mothers of Iceland were captives, carried away by force, their legacy written not in ink, but in bloodlines. Centuries later, their descendants walk among us, unaware that their roots trace back to a burned village on a distant shore, to a night when the sea smelled of smoke and fear. Before we go deeper, if you believe the real history, the kind that hides beneath legends, deserves to be heard, consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we don't romanticize the past. We uncover the truths history tried to forget, because the next part of this story is even darker. For those captives who survived the voyage, for those who reached the Viking homelands alive, a new nightmare began. They entered a world where their bodies were currency, where their worth was measured not in humanity, but in usefulness. Their names were gone, their fate was sealed, and for some, their journey would end not in life, but as part of a ritual so disturbing that even those who witnessed it could barely describe it. The ship lands at dawn. The air smells of pine and cold earth. Above you, the horizon is rimmed with snow. You have no idea where you are, only that the language has changed again, and the faces around you show no pity. You've crossed an invisible line in the world, and now there is no way back. The Vikings called this new land home. Norway, Denmark, Iceland, a realm of raw beauty and merciless order. Here, every house, every field, every hall was built upon hierarchy, and at the bottom of that structure were the thralls. They worked in silence, unseen, unthanked, their lives reduced to labor and obedience. To the world outside, the Norse were builders of ships, discoverers of lands, but within their longhouses, another world existed, one of smoke, sweat, and ceaseless toil. A captured woman might rise before dawn to grind grain, to haul water from frozen streams, to tend fires that could never go out. Her hands would harden, her back would bend, her language would fade. She would learn the words of her captors, not from books or kindness, but from command and punishment. Historians once called this a household economy. The truth is more haunting. It was a society powered by silence, the silence of those who could not speak, whose names were erased from the record, but whose work made every feast, every voyage, every saga possible. The sagas written later in Iceland mention them only in passing, a line, a reference, a name without a story. But archaeological evidence tells what the words do not. Skeletons buried without grave goods, bones marked by strain, signs of starvation and cold. In life, they were invisible. In death, they remain so. And yet, not all servitude looked the same. Some women were taken into the homes of powerful men, not as wives, but as something far more complicated. In Old Norse, they were called frilla, a word that roughly translates to concubine. These women lived between worlds, not free, not enslaved in chains, but bound by circumstance to the men who had once captured them. Their lives were an unspoken negotiation between survival and ownership. Children born from these unions were called friluburn. They bore the mark of their mother's captivity, never fully accepted, never fully free. Their future depended on the will of the man who fathered them. He could claim them as his own, or condemn them to the same fate as their mothers. It's a truth that unsettles the legends. When we imagine the Viking homesteads, the roaring fires, the banquets, the songs, we rarely think of the quiet women who stirred those fires, who stood unseen behind the men who claimed glory. Yet genetic evidence reveals that these women shaped the North more deeply than the warriors ever could. When modern scientists studied the DNA of Iceland's early settlers, they made a shocking discovery. While most male ancestry traced back to Norway, most female ancestry came from Ireland and Scotland, the very coasts the Vikings raided most fiercely. The women who had been taken were the ones who built the next generation. The mothers of Iceland were captives, and their legacy endures in the blood of their descendants today. History calls it colonization. In truth, it was inheritance through suffering. But the darkest truth of all lay not in labor or lineage, but in ritual. The Viking world was bound by belief, a religion of fate, sacrifice, and honor. And when a great man died, his power demanded a price. Sometimes that price was human life. The 10th century diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan, traveling among the Norse along the Volga River, described what he saw when a chieftain was buried. His words, calm and precise, have outlived the screams of those he described. A slave girl was chosen, willing, they said, though she had no right to refuse. For days, she was given wine and gifts, dressed in fine clothes, praised as though she were honored. But beneath the songs and the ceremony was something far colder, a ritual of control disguised as glory. When the day came, the girl was led to her master's ship, his body laid upon a bed of treasures. She was brought before him, given one final drink, and then silence fell. Witnesses later said her cries were drowned out by drums, so that others might not hear her fear. When the smoke rose from the burning ship, it carried with it a terrible lesson. Even in death, some were destined to serve. For centuries, scholars doubted this story, believing it too grotesque to be true. But then, the earth began to speak. Archaeologists uncovered graves in Norway and Denmark where the remains of high-born men and women were buried alongside those who had died violently, strangled, stabbed, or laid beneath them as offerings. The myth was real. The Viking world saw no contradiction in this. To them, it was order, the same order that justified taking lives, owning people, and turning pain into wealth. Their sagas, their songs, Their gods all reflected that truth. Strength ruled, and weakness was a debt to be collected. But time erodes even the hardest iron. As Christianity spread across Scandinavia, the old gods began to fade. Churches rose where the longhouses once stood, and slowly, the trade that had fed empires began to die. Officially, the enslavement of fellow Christians was condemned. Unofficially, it continued for generations. Shadow that lingered long after the last longship sailed. The Viking Age ended not with a single battle, but with silence, the same silence that had always surrounded its victims. When we picture Vikings today, fierce, bold, adventurous, we see the image they built for themselves. But beneath that legend lies a quieter truth, carried by the women whose names history forgot, the ones who wove the sails, who bore the children, who never saw home again. They are the ghosts beneath the glory. And maybe that's the real story of the Viking Age. Not one of conquest, but of cost, because every saga of triumph hides a silence behind it. And if you listen closely, across the centuries, across the waves, you might still hear them, the voices that were never allowed to speak. So, I'll leave you with this question. When history celebrates its heroes, who pays the price for their legend?